So my name is Iskandar. I work for Syncaps, based in London. I look after a lot of the technology part of the operations here in Europe. And what I do every month is give a rundown on the changes that have happened to the Facebook platform since our previous meeting. Our last meeting was February 16th. Since then, Pages, Timeline for Pages has been launched, along with a bunch of APIs to let us do specific timeline stuff on Pages. So I'm going to talk through first the timeline updates for Pages and the APIs, and then some additional Open Graph updates, and then finally some just little other updates you should probably be aware of. I'll talk a little bit longer than normal. I'm not going to get too heavy in the technical side. It's more about what there is available, and I'll show you some examples. So if you're not technical, you won't have a hard time, I promise, I hope. All right, so let's start. So timeline for Pages. It's a big deal. Everybody loves it. Has anyone, who here manages a page and has switched over to the new timeline? Loads of you. Who here has a page and has not yet switched over? Okay, so a few people. So I think the general consensus for most brands and people who operate pages is that timeline's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing. You get lots of capabilities that come with it, and it's great for users. So Todd showed you a few things that you could do with messaging, and I'm going to cover how you can use the API to help you do that stuff. So first of all, you can use the existing APIs have been extended to allow you to change attributes of your page. So the about, the description, general info, website, phone, as well as changing the big cover photo at the top, which is really important for having a nice design-looking page. So I'll do a quick example. For my examples, I am using the Facebook Graph Explorer, which is a really, really useful tool, and I recommend all of you look it up if you haven't seen it already. So the forms that you're seeing here, like this, is pretty much literally what it is. I'm posting to that URL with these fields. And the Graph API Explorer deals with access tokens for you in quite a nice way. So instead of showing you curl, command line stuff, this is what I'm going to show you most of tonight. So I'm now changing my generic page, and I'm changing the about and various fields, and I'm doing it this way. I submit it, and this is what happens on my page if I click on about. All right? Right. This is stuff that we could do before, but this is specifically updated for timeline. So tabs have not gone away with timeline. They still exist. They're not really going to be called tabs anymore, since the name doesn't really make any sense. But they still exist. There's been a big change for people who do specialize in building custom tabs for pages. You can no longer set a custom tab as the default landing page for a user. There's no such thing as a default landing tab anymore. It's going to go away as of the 30th of March. This is a big deal for a lot of custom tab vendors because that's where they get a lot of their traffic from. Someone new to a page coming there, visiting it, their tab will load first. Now that's not the case. Users will have to explicitly choose your tab, or they have to come to the page via a special link. So you can still directly link to a tab URL, which is really important for stuff like advertising. There's a bunch of other APIs. The most important one for a tab is being able to change a new image. So on the timeline page, you get a new image instead of a small icon. It's a bigger size. It's 111 by 74 pixels. And I'll do an example of changing that. The other APIs for managing tabs are the same. So you can still add, remove tabs, change their position, change their names. It works the same as it did a month ago, which is a relief, I'm sure, to a lot of people. So let's update the page app image, the tab image. You can barely see it in the top right. That's my image I want to change it to. I'm going to post the page ID, and then the tabs connections, and then the app ID, and I'm going to provide it with a custom image URL. So this URL is an image that exists somewhere else on the internet. It can be anywhere, as long as Facebook can reach it. You can also submit the raw image data as well, if you want. So I post that, and there it is. So there's my, this here is my custom page app image. All right? Easy. But really important. You'll notice as well, if you do have, if you deal with tabs a lot, is that there's now a fold, right? Before, when you loaded a Facebook page and the tabs were lined up in the left sidebar, you could see maybe 6, 7, or 8. Now you can only see about 2 or 3 custom apps. The rest will be underneath this little button here. And so the position of your tab app, your page app, becomes really important for getting traffic. All right, great. So pages can now have milestones. This is one of the cool things. How many of you have looked at the Coca-Cola page, the timeline page? It's really cool because you can go all the way down to the bottom and it shows they were founded in 1892 or whenever it was, which is really nice for brands to show their history. You can now add those milestones using the Graph API. So here's how you do it. First, you can read from the milestones connections. You can post to it. All you need to provide is a title, a description, and a start time. And of course, you can delete milestones as well, provided that your app has created it. So here's my example for my generic page. I'm posting to my page ID, and then the milestones connections, give it a title, a description, and a start time. And there it is, shows up on my page timeline. This is probably a bad example because the founded is a specially treated word for Facebook. When you create a page and start adding milestones, Facebook will ask you to specify when that page started. So I apologize for my bad example. You probably want to do something like, you know, when you launched a new product, or say you opened your first international office, or something like that is quite useful. Moving on swiftly. Private messaging. So direct messaging from users. You can now read the inbox for a page and see all the private messages that users have sent directly to the page. You cannot, as Todd said, you cannot contact these users directly. They have to initiate the contact with you first. And once they do, you can reply twice before they reply again. So you can read the list of all the conversations using the conversations connections. And then if you want to reply, you just post to the thread ID, which you get from the conversations, and you add a message. So here's an example. My fan, or someone who likes my page, Jessica Williams, has asked what's the deal with one of my products, right? So the view here at the top, that's from my admin panel on the timeline itself. But I can read this using the API. So I can have a special app that does this for me. I've used the conversations connections to get the thread ID. And now I'm going to post to the thread ID / messages with my response, right? So I like Jessica Williams. She's been a good customer. I'm going to give her a nice reply, tell her where to go, and tell her, give her a nice discount code. All right, so that's what I'm posting there at the bottom. And this is the result. This is the conversation I've had with Jessica Williams. Again, all of this has happened without me actually using the native Facebook interface, right? This is all API-based, which is great for big brands or enterprises, or even, you know, standard scheduling tools like CodeSuite, Hootsuite, those type of tools can really take advantage of this. Loads of apps can do it. There's one other thing that you can do to control post visibility on the timeline page. So basically, by default, you can change a setting on your page that says that all user posts default to hidden. And this essentially lets you do pre-moderation of your Facebook timeline page, which for big brands, global brands with really you know, risk-averse for social media, some of the slower starters in the space, this can be really important to them. If you can tell them, well, nothing will show up on your timeline that you have not approved. That's very important. And that also goes back to Todd's point about the Macy's problem, right? So this is really important for brands. And using this, you can control the visibility of a post using API. And you just basically set the isHidden flag to true or false once you have the post ID. Public Insights, again, another really cool thing. You can go to any page and see a little bit about what's happening. This is the Facebook page itself, Facebook's page on Facebook. I don't know what happened near the end of February and why things are trailing off. I'm sure they'll be looking at that themselves. This information is also publicly available, except not really the graph. I think you can get people talking about this in total likes using the API. A few things that are missing, but which we can safely assume are in the works from Facebook. Pinning a post. If you pin a post, it shows up in the top left of the timeline for about a week before it expires. You can't do that yet with the API, but it's a really useful feature if you have a weekly sale or some sort of special announcement you want to make. You cannot feature a post. When you feature a post, it expands to take up the entire width of the timeline. You can't do that yet with the API. And finally, you cannot backdate any content. So if you want to put a post for something that happened on January 1st, you can do that using the user interface, but not the API. And this is an example of using the user interface. I think it's safe to assume that those API features will come. When they'll come, nobody knows. And that's the timeline. Okay, moving on. There have been some really cool Open Graph updates recently as well. This was announced at the Facebook Marketing Conference a few weeks ago. Developers can now ask for permission from users to read actions that they've done with using a third-party app. For example, I listen to music with Spotify. Spotify publishes those actions to the graph. Say you're someone like Last.fm and you want to look at stuff people are listening to because it's interesting to you and you like that data. You can now ask permission from me. Last.fm could say, hey, give us permission to read your music actions. And I can say, sure. Last.fm can then go off and then pull out all of the music that I've listened to and do stuff with it. Right? So this applies not just to the built-in actions like music, news, video. This also applies to custom apps. So say I want to write an app that aggregates all the Pinterest work that people have been doing, all the pinning. I could have an app that does that and combines it with, mashes it up with some other source of data. So this is really a powerful thing. And we haven't really seen any apps come out that do this yet, but I can imagine there'll be quite a few. So how do you use it? To read the actions themselves, it's those blue lines at the top. You basically get from the graph user ID and then the app namespace and the action, specific action. So you need to know what the action is. You can't just get a random list of a random app and start reading stuff. You need to know explicitly what the action is. And if you know if it's a vertical like music, news, or video, you just get the connections and you're done. You need to get special permission using this format. It works for friends as well. So if I wanted to write an app that said, you know, here's a bunch of recommendations based on all your friends' listens across 16 different music apps, awesome, you can do it. Very exciting. The bottom here is just an example dialog for what it looks like when you do ask for those actions, those permissions. So you can't really read it, but at the bottom it says you're asking permission for a video activity and the FDGL demo app activity. So I'm asking for user actions.video over here, and user actions : and that my demo app is meant to be my app namespace. Cool. Okay, moving on. You can now also very easily tag your friends and add a place to an Open Graph action and a feed story. This is really quite a simple thing, and it's really nice, and also helps improve the way things look on a timeline because items will have a location now, and we'll show on a map if you want. In this example, which is a very simple URL example, I've just added a place ID up here. This is a very low-tech laser pointer, by the way. I've added a page ID here, and it shows up there. And that's all I did. I just added that, and it just magically works. So all you need to do is know your place IDs, add them to your Open Graph action calls, and the location will automatically be attached to that. You can also do this with objects. So if you want to have an object in the graph that has geodata associated with it, you can now embed that into your Open Graph metadata at the top of the page. So the example here is you're basically adding location, geopoint, I think is what the format's called. Just add latitude, longitude, and altitude, and when people like it or people do stuff and interact with that object, Facebook will know the geographical information. And you can also add a place field to a normal API call when you're posting to the feed, which is what I'm doing here. I'm basically posting that I am, here's a news story to my feed. I'm with someone at a place. That's it. So it's almost like creating a check-in automatically, right? And tagging your friends in that check-in. So the fields you need, in this case, you just post a me feed like you would for any update. You need to add a valid place ID, like before, when you post the action. And you need a comma-separated list of Facebook IDs for the people you want to tag. So in this case, I'm tagging my colleague Jessica and saying we're at the Syncaps headquarters. And you can see the API call is very simple. Right? I'm just posting a message with some tags at a place. It's nice because it's nice and clean. There's a bunch of other stuff which I haven't had time to delve into deeply, and I certainly don't have time to get into now. But there's lots of searching around locations and actions. And you can use FQL table to do all kinds of custom querying based on location and distance. So all the actions now that people have been pushing into the graph, those actions now may have a location attached to them. So not just what you did, but where'd you do it? And who'd you do it with? Great. A few more things, and we're almost done. When you post an action, say you post an action for a pizza slice. I ate a pizza slice at the Facebook Developer Garage. Usually, if that story gets promoted to your feed or to your friends' feeds, it will show the Open Graph image of the objects that I interacted with, right? So it'll be a generic pizza slice image. Facebook have enabled developers to use a user's photo instead. You have to apply for this explicitly when you submit your action. So say, let me think of a good example. My action is I painted a portrait, like one of these, let's say. I'm not that good, but yeah, it's a valid example anyway. I painted a portrait, and if you want to, you can then tell Facebook, I want users to be able to submit their own photos. When it comes around time for the user to submit it, you need to do a couple of things. This is the Open Graph Action Creation Call, which you may recognize. All you need to do is add an image URL, and then specify here a little flag telling Facebook that it's user-generated. And if Facebook has approved your action with the user-generated extra bit of data, then this will go into the feed and into on people's timelines like this. Absolutely massive, massive. The size, I mean, because a standard image size will be about a fifth of that, right? An Open Graph image. So it's really good for increasing visibility of actions and probably will impact distribution as well. The rules around that are, of course, that it has to be a photo that the user took, right? And this is geared a lot towards mobile apps. Yeah? Okay, nearly done. Games, I was talking to Joe at Gameroff about this a little bit earlier. Facebook have a scores API, which means that if you have a game, you could tell Facebook what a user scored when they played. The reason Facebook have this is because depending on what happened in the graph and what your friends are doing, Facebook will automatically generate a story that goes onto your timeline and into people's feeds saying that you either got a high score, I beat my last high score, or you passed a friend's score, so I got a better score than Joe. Sorry, Joe. And also, just if you got a score at all. So if you have a game and you want to increase competition socially, you should definitely look into using this Scores API. Now, the new stories are, I think, available now. Right. The new authentication dialog. Has everyone here enabled their authentication, the new enhanced auth dialog? Yeah? Enabled? It is rolling out now automatically to every user in little batches of 5% at a time. They started rolling it out beginning of the month. It could be that all of your users now are seeing a new authentication dialog. So if you haven't entered in the data for it, you should, because you can add a nice description. You can add some additional text that will help users feel more comfortable in accepting your authentication. There's a really important permissions change that came with this, and I think this was driven by the fact that users were seeing two dialogues a lot. There's sort of a two-stage authentication process now. So the publish actions permission now kind of contains a lot of the publish stream permissions. If you get publish actions from a user, you can post to the timeline, which is what it originally was intended for, but you can also tag photos and publish photos and videos to a user's stream. Right, so they've extended that quite a bit. This is great for mobile developers. Does anyone here do native iOS apps? Yeah? Okay. A few people. This is really simple and powerful the way it works. So if you're browsing Facebook using the native Facebook app on your iPhone, someone posts a link on the wall from another Facebook, another Apple iOS app. I say my Angry Birds score is there. Right? If I click on that link, I select that link in my feed, it will open up Angry Birds natively. Right? No faffing around with a web interface. It can go directly to the Angry Birds app in iOS. So the example pretty much describes exactly how it works. There's a Pinterest story. The user selects it. It goes straight into the Pinterest app. If the user does not have the app, they go to the App Store page. Right? So basically, we're jumping from native iOS app directly into another native iOS app, which is great. If you're doing mobile web apps, though, you'll still need to continue what you're doing, which will be sniffing the user agent and redirecting appropriately. There's only one real policy update I wanted to highlight. You can now go crazy with autoplay media on your tabs. I think since the default landing tab has gone away, Facebook are relaxing this restriction. I think a lot of big brands have been abusing this anyway, so it's almost a de facto admission of defeat. But if you want to have automatic animation play, a video start playing, even audio, I leave it to your best judgment if it's the best thing for your users, but you can if you want. Facebook will not come down on you. And also, if you're doing a cover photo for a timeline page, be very careful because Facebook have a lot of restrictions in what you can and cannot do with that timeline cover. You're not supposed to do things like have addresses or contact details in it. And then a few other updates. The Graph API now returns error codes. You know, yeah, it's amazing. Yay, it's a small thing, but it makes a big difference. No more parsing error text, which would be nice. The error text will remain the same, so if your code, you don't need to change anything. Everything will still work. The Insight stuff now shows really interesting mobile referral info, so you can see what kind of devices users have come from. And also for newbies, if you've never done any Facebook development, you could go to a new training site which has lots of little training videos. I'm not going to read the URL out, but the slides will be available to download. And finally, inline video in the newsfeed works better now, apparently. You can set the Open Graph video attribute in the metadata, and it will automatically play when the user selects it in the feed. And finally, don't forget to check the Facebook developer roadmap for breakages. They're doing a pretty good job of keeping with their 90-day breaking change policy, which means they have to announce it 90 days in advance. But if you're not sure, check there. It's really the authoritative place to go. And that's all.